I've talked before about how the most interesting Versus series characters are the ones that no one ever expected to actually appear. And for all of the ones I've covered, I don't think they quite match up to one of the series' most triumphant examples, Jin Saotome. Jin is the protagonist of Cyberbots Full Metal Madness, a 1995 mech fighting arcade game by Capcom. Never heard of it? Well, there's a good reason for that. Cyberbots got an incredibly limited arcade release outside of Japan, and the console ports to PlayStation and Saturn, both of which are actually pretty decent, never left Japan initially. The former, in its untranslated state, did come to PS1 and PSP via PS1 Classics, but it wasn't until Capcom Arcade Stadium, and later Capcom Fighting Collection, that the arcade version got a wider international release. Cyberbots itself is actually the second game in a spiritual mecha trilogy from Capcom, preceded by Armored Warriors and succeeded by Tech Romancer. Armored Warriors in particular has the most ties to Cyberbots. It was a beat-em-up featuring mechas piloted by humans, one of which was Bloodia, the same mech Jin uses in Cyberbots. A few other mechs from Armored Warriors show up in Cyberbots as well. Like Cyberbots, Armored Warriors also got a very limited arcade release outside of Japan, but unlike Cyberbots, was never released on home consoles until 2018, with the release of the Capcom beat-em-up bundle. In Cyberbots, Jin gets involved with the event of the game after his father's death, which was initially considered to be an accident. He soon realizes that there might have been more nefarious factors at play, and resolves to find out the truth while also proving himself as a capable pilot on the variable armor circuit. Jin's full name, Jin Saotome, is a double reference. While, yes, Saotome is a common Japanese surname, it's most likely inspired by Dr. Saotome from Getter Robo. Bears mentioning that one of the main characters in Getter Robo is also named Hayato Jin, so I'm guessing both names served as inspiration. According to Jin's character designer and longtime Capcom artist Kido Nishimura, Jin's visual design is loosely based on the design of Kakugo, the main protagonist of the Apocalypse Zero manga, with the trailing scarf in particular being a standout visual nod. Apocalypse Zero is a post-apocalyptic manga that's a bit infamous for its graphic content. As someone with a pretty high tolerance for hyperviolence and sexual overtones in media, I read a good chunk of it as research for this video and yeah, it's a lot. I'm no prude, but it is very much a read at your own risk kind of thing, just a fair warning. I haven't decided if I'll ever go back to finish it. Jin's first appearance in the Versus series was in the first Marvel vs. Capcom game, and he's arguably the most interesting inclusion in the game. Being that Cyberbots had practically zero presence outside of Japan, Jin may as well have been an original character to the Western world, but that didn't stop him from becoming one of the most popular characters in the series. His portrayal in Marvel is interesting because it's a bit of a contrast from Cyberbots, where he's a lot more serious and stoic. A comment on a previous video mentioned that Jin is arguably the Versus series equivalent to Captain Falcon in Smash Bros. Characters known as pilots in their home series being brought over into a crossover fighter and being given an exaggerated over-the-top moveset, and I think that's accurate. That's actually not entirely made up for Jin specifically in this game though. I've talked about Capcom's secret files before, small flyers and booklets that were released alongside their arcade games containing trivia, lore, and developer interviews about the associated games. Cyberbots got one specifically for the Japanese limited edition release of the Sega Saturn version. It featured some special art for Jin, most notably one piece depicting him in what appears to be an outfit based off of the standard Japanese World War II soldier uniform, with him wielding a katana, which he actually displays in his Marvel vs. Capcom win pose. Between the art there and some of his story beats in Cyberbots being inspired by Domon, the lead protagonist of G Gundam, it's evident that they wanted to play Jin as something of a patriotic, hot-blooded mecha protagonist with a dash of goofiness for good measure. It's definitely an inspired choice and one that works well, I'd say. Jin's voice actor in both Marvel games is Yuji Ueda, who also voices Strider in both games as well. Jin had a different voice actor in Cyberbots, and I wouldn't normally bring this up, but it's worth mentioning because his voice actor there is none other than Toru Furuya, who most notably was the voice of Amuro, the lead protagonist of the very first Mobile Suit Gundam series. Cyberbots has some fun referential casting going on in it, including one I'll get to a bit later on in the video. All that said, let's get started. Jin's theme in Marvel vs. Capcom is similar to Captain Commando's in that it's not an arrangement of a song from Cyberbots, but instead an original composition made specifically for this game. It's a really dramatic sounding piece that puts to work those recognizable guitar and brass samples from Capcom's CPS2 engine, and it's among the first songs that come to mind when I think of music from this game. That said, Jin is a pretty weird character to control. A lot of his normals hit hard, but they have a ton of wind-up and even worse recovery. Even worse, a lot of his normals don't combo into each other outside of certain specific cases, making him feel weirdly like a hit-and-run character in a game where hyper-offensive play usually wins the day. Jin's first special move is Saotome Typhoon, one of the rare charge moves in this game.
Good.
This move has a pretty decent hitbox and advances forward, but is super punishable on block. Saotome Dynamite is done with the flash kick motion. Jin ejects all of his armor off of him in explosive fashion, sending the opponent flying.
Good.
This seems random, but it's actually based on an ability that Apocalypse Zero's lead protagonist has, which also sees him explosively disrobe, though to much more gruesome results usually. Saotome Crush is done with a half circle back and kick. This isn't a command grab, but a hit grab similar to the ones Cable and Hayato have in Marvel 2, so it can be blocked. Jin grabs the opponent and slides them along the ground and up all four sides of the screen before slamming them. This one is more than likely another Apocalypse Zero reference, where Kakugo uses the propulsion of his armor to drag his opponent along the ground. The bottom half is blurred out because I don't want to be demonetized, but just use your imagination. Jin's taunt is actually worth noting here as well, as it's actually named Saotome Fire. If you hold taunt and rapidly press the punch buttons, Jin will eventually catch fire, and if an opponent jumps into him, they'll actually take damage. Apparently the developers put this in because they thought it'd be hilarious. Can't say I disagree. Jin's first and most famous hyper combo is Bloody a Punch. He does a punching motion and Bloodia comes in from off screen and does a giant punch to the opponent. The closer your opponent is to the middle of the screen, the more damage and hits it'll inflict. Jin's second hyper combo is Bloodia Vulcan. Jin summons Bloodia and hops inside him to dish out a ton of machine gun fire from Bloodia.
Marvelous.
Jin is invincible during the move's duration, and it makes for a pretty good punish if you can time it right. Note that Jin dramatically snaps his fingers to summon Bloodia. This is a direct homage to G Gundam, where Domon snaps his fingers and summons his Shining Gundam the very same way. Jin's third hyper combo is Saotome Cyclone. This is a powered up version of his Saotome Typhoon that essentially functions as an advancing hit grab. If the opponent is hit, they're launched up into the air and take some damage. Like the Typhoon, this is incredibly punishable on block. Jin's most unique hyper combo can't be done via traditional means, but is instead a permanent install super, Saotome Shine. This activates when Jin is the last character on a team and has a quarter or less of his health left. He gets a small damage and defense buff, glows gold, and most notably gets limited super armor that lasts until he's KO'd. Characters in media having golden colored super forms isn't uncommon, but given the use of Shine in the move name and the other shoutouts in his moveset, I'm willing to bet that this is a shoutout to the Shining Gundam's true super form in G Gundam, which also augments his strength and defensive capabilities, among other things. Here are Jin's colors. And here are his exclusive colors in the PS1 version. And here is Jin's ending. Jin's ending is a shout out to Gawaine's ending in Cyberbots, where he sacrifices himself, and all that remains of him is his sword, which Jin holds in mostly the same way Ryu holds Jin's scarf. Before we move on to Marvel 2 though, there's one other Cyberbots related thing I want to talk about. Princess Devilot the Death Satan IX is one of the antagonists of Cyberbots, and aside from Jin is the most popular character from that game by far, especially in Japan. She's very rarely seen without her two servants, who follow her every whim and is an incredibly spoiled brat. According to Kino Nishimura, Devilot's design was largely based on two things: the original illustrations of Alice by John Tenniel in Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland book, as well as Princess Elena, one of the main party members of Dragon Quest IV. The Dragon Quest IV inspiration also applies to Devilot's servants, who were loosely inspired by Kuro and Boria from Dragon Quest IV, and serve a similar role for Elena. However, the rest of the Cyberbot staff didn't actually notice the Dragon Quest inspiration and instead made another pop culture connection, this time to the Doranbo gang from Tatsunoko's Yatterman series, Yatterman itself being a part of the Time Bokan series. The Doranbo gang wasn't the first, but is possibly one of the biggest innovators of the terrible trio villain archetype in Japanese media, usually featuring a comedic set of three antagonists that bumble around and are mostly played for laughs. You've probably seen at least one homage to them around somewhere. Jesse, James, and Meowth in the Pokemon anime are definitely one obvious shout out to them, and the Dark Wings in various Tales of games, but most notably Tales of the Abyss, is another nod to them. Capcom ended up going far enough that they actually got the voice actor for Boyaki, one of Doronjo's trio, to voice Xavier. That voice actor, the late great Joji Yanami, would go on to reprise his role years later in Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, since he shows up in several of Doronjo's moves in that game. Tatsunoko vs. Capcom is where the similarities also come full circle. Doronjo's ending has her trio humorously cross paths with Devilot's trio. This all informs Devilot's cameo as an assist character in Marvel 1, where she and her servants show up alongside their mech before it humorously blows up, leaving them in tatters. Something that consistently happened to the Doranbo gang as well. Devilot's mech in Marvel and Cyberbots is the Super 8, an octopus-esque mech with some annoying tentacles. Like Bloodia, Super 8 also originally debuted in Armored Warriors, where it served as the boss for the game's second stage. Jin doesn't really get anything new in Marvel 2, but instead is refined a bit. While he still can't combo medium normals into heavies, his general combo ability across the board has been made way more efficient, and he plays a lot smoother as a result. Saotome Cyclone in particular received a massive damage boost, making it one of the most damaging level 1s in the game, alongside having its hitbox massively expanded vertically. If you're playing the now delisted HD versions on Xbox 360 and PS3 in widescreen, Jin arguably made the worst transition, as a lot of his animations were only made with the 4:3 aspect ratio in mind. So his intro, his Bloody Punch super, and especially his Saotome Crush super all look pretty awkward. Jin's first assist is Saotome Typhoon. His second assist is Saotome Dynamite. And his last assist is his launcher. Jin's Marvel 2 colors appear to be inspired by the variable armors that appear in both Cyberbots and Armored Warriors. Light Kick is based off of Warlock. Heavy Punch is based on Bloodia. Heavy Kick is based off of Golden. Assist 1 is based off of the in-game sprite coloring for Super 8 and Cyberbots. And Assist 2 is based on Helion. Jin is to this day, over 2 decades after his last appearance, one of the most popular characters in the entire Versus series. A feat that's doubly impressive when you remember the Western world didn't even really get a viable release of his game until over a decade after the fact. He has a few cameos in Marvel 3, showing up in Hawkeye's ending, as well as Heroes and Heralds, and also shows up in that Days of Future Past poster as well. His other most notable playable appearance in the fighting game would be in Tech Romancer, where he pilots Blodia and is exclusive to the Dreamcast port of the game as a hidden character. The Dreamcast port, having come out after Marvel 1, seems to use his over-the-top characterization for him in that game. The recent Capcom Fighting Collection has the arcade release of Cyberbots in it, and I wholeheartedly recommend it for a convenient way to play the game, even though it's lacking the extra PS1 and Saturn content. Paired with Armored Warriors and the Beat 'em Up bundle, it's a great way to get some quick Blodia action. That's going to do it for this video. Thanks again for watching, like and subscribe if you'd like to see more, and I'll catch you next time. Take care.